This day in time. What happened today, years ago.
Have you ever stopped to think about how one single day, just a date on the calendar, can hold these completely different but really massive historical moments across centuries even?
It's pretty wild when you look at it that way, yeah.
Well, today that's exactly what we're doing. We're diving deep into one specific date, July 6th. Our mission is to sort of pull out the key insights from three totally distinct events that happened on that day, but, years apart.
Right.
We're talking medieval power grabs, the start of a huge American political party, and then something incredibly personal, a story of survival. It's quite a journey.
It really is, and what I find fascinating is, even though the times and places are so different, medieval England, 19th century America, World War II Europe, you see these recurring human themes, don't you?
Like what?
Well, things like ambition, resistance, sheer survival instinct, they pop up again and again. This shared date, July 6th, it kind of highlights how history doesn't move in a straight line.
Unpredictable.
Exactly, unpredictable. A single day can be just another Tuesday for most people, but for others, it's monumental, changing power structures, changing societies, changing individual lives forever.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's jump right into our first July 6th moment. We need to go way back for this one, all the way back to 1483. England.
Richard III.
Richard III's coronation. Picture this. England's politically shaky. King Edward V has just died, quite suddenly.
And that sudden death is key, because Edward IV left two young sons. The famous princes in the tower, they were the actual heirs.
Right, the legitimate heirs.
Which immediately creates this really dangerous power vacuum. Their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, he gets appointed Lord Protector, supposedly to rule for his young nephew, the new King Edward V.
Supposedly being the operative word there.
Well, yes, because Richard wasn't just going to babysit the throne, was he? Power, ambition, it's a potent mix.
It really is. And what happened next was, well, it was pretty masterful political maneuvering, if ruthless. Richard, the Protector, uses his power to basically declare his dead brother Edward's marriage, the marriage to Elizabeth Woodville, invalid.
Which wasn't a small thing. That was huge.
A bombshell, exactly. Because if that marriage was invalid, legally speaking,
then the sons, the princes, were illegitimate.
Precisely. Wiped them right out of the line of succession, just like that, which conveniently made Richard the next legitimate heir. So he moves fast, ascends to the throne himself, and the whole thing culminates in this grand coronation at Westminster Abbey on July 6, 1483. It was incredibly quick, ruthless, as you said.
And what's so striking, historically, is how Richard's move, which was all about securing his power, right? It actually ended up doing the opposite in the long run. It sowed so much instability.
How so?
Well, the questions about legitimacy just wouldn't go away.
Yeah.
Especially, what happened to the princes. They just vanished. That mystery hung over everything. His whole reign was tainted by it. And this whole drama, it's really the climax of the Wars of the Roses, that bloody fight between the Yorks and Lancasters.
Right.
Richard's coronation, his power grab, it effectively finished off the main Yorkist line. It's a classic case, really, of the solution creating an even bigger problem down the line.
It definitely paved the way for what came next. That cloud of suspicion around Richard, the missing princes, you could argue it made it easier for Henry Tudor to rally support.
Absolutely. Led directly to the rise of the Tudors.
And here's a detail I always find fascinating, kind of hammers home the end of that era. Richard III wasn't just the last Yorkist king, he was the last English king ever to actually die in battle.
At Bosworth Field, 1485.
Yeah, a violent end to a violent reign, and really the end of a whole chapter of English history.
It really underscores how his actions on and around that July 6th ultimately backfired, leading to a total dynasty shift. The ripples were enormous.
Okay, so from that, brutal medieval power play, let's think about another July 6th, centuries later. A totally different kind of power emerging, the power of people getting together.
Collective action, yes.
We need to jump across the Atlantic for this one. Fast forward to 1854, America, Jackson, Michigan specifically. This July 6th marks the founding of the Republican Party.
Talk about a contrast. From monarchy and dynastic wars to a democracy tearing itself apart.
Absolutely. Different world, different problems, but huge stakes again.
And the context here is just inescapable. The U.S. at that time was utterly consumed by the issue of slavery. It wasn't just a political debate, it was a moral crisis splitting the country in two.
Deeply divided. And the immediate trigger, the spark for this July 6th meeting, was the Kansas-Nebraska Act. It had just been passed.
Right, and that act basically threw gasoline on the fire.
How to do that?
Well, it allowed settlers in new territories, Kansas and Nebraska, to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. Popular sovereignty, they called it.
But that overturned earlier agreements, right? Like the Missouri Compromise.
Exactly. The Missouri Compromise had banned slavery north of a certain line. Kansas and Nebraska ripped that up. Suddenly, huge swaths of land that were supposed to be free could potentially become slave territories. The North was outraged.
It shattered any sense of stability on the issue.
Completely. People felt the old political parties, the Whigs, the Democrats, just weren't dealing with it. Or worse, were complicit. So that's the backdrop for Jackson, Michigan, July 6th. You get this meeting of anti-slavery activists.
And it wasn't just one group, was it?
No, not at all. It was a real mix. You had former Whigs, their party was falling apart over slavery. You had Free Soilers, whose whole reason for being was stopping slavery spread. And you even had Democrats, who were disgusted with their own party's stance.
A coalition of the fed up, basically.
You could say that. What's amazing is that these people from different political backgrounds came together with this one clear goal: form a new party, a party whose central platform was stopping the expansion of slavery, period.
That's a bold move, starting a whole new major party.
Incredibly bold and incredibly effective. This meeting, this founding on July 6th, it established the Republican Party, which, is still one of the two major parties today.
And its impact was immediate, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That anti-slavery expansion platform led directly to Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860. And that, in turn,
led to the southern states seceding.
And the Civil War. You really can't overstate the significance of that meeting in Jackson.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How one single overriding issue can just ignite this massive political change.
It does. It shows the power of a movement finding a political voice. When people feel the existing system isn't addressing a fundamental moral crisis, they can create something entirely new, incredibly quickly.
And change the course of history.
Completely reshape the political landscape. It's a powerful example of how citizens can react when they feel their core values are threatened. It took immense courage to break away and build that new party.
And it's interesting, too, that July 6th is the official date, but it wasn't like it came out of nowhere.
No, that's a good point. There had been smaller meetings, discussions happening across the North before that, in Ripon, Wisconsin, for example.
So it was like a groundswell.
Exactly. A grassroots movement that finally coalesced and found its formal structure on that day in Michigan. It wasn't just cooked up by politicians in a back room. It had real energy behind it.
Right. Okay, so from medieval kings and political revolutions, our final July 6th story is much more intimate and profoundly sad.
Yes. This one takes us to the 20th century. Amsterdam, 1942. World War II.
We're talking about the day the Frank family went into hiding.
A shift from these huge political events to a single family's desperate fight for survival. The backdrop, of course, is Nazi-occupied Netherlands.
What was the situation like then?
Just horrifying. The persecution of Jewish people was escalating rapidly. Discrimination, restrictions, roundups, deportations to concentration camps. It was systematic and brutal. Fear was constant.
And for the Franks, there was a specific trigger, wasn't there? Something that forced their hand on July 6th.
Yes. Anne Frank's older sister, Margot, received a call-up notice, a summons ordering her to report for a so-called Nazi labor camp.
Which everyone knew was basically a death sentence or close to it.
Exactly. It was the moment they knew they couldn't wait any longer. The choice was stark. Report for deportation or disappear.
So they chose to disappear.
They did. On July 6th, 1942, Otto Frank, Edith Frank, and their daughters Margot and Anne moved into the secret hiding place they had prepared. The secret annex, the Achterhuis.
Hidden behind Otto Frank's business premises.
That's right, on the Prinsengracht in Amsterdam. They weren't alone for long either. 4 other Jewish people later joined them in that confined space, sharing the fear, the silence, the hope.
And the people who helped them, Miepkes and the others, incredibly brave.
Unbelievably brave, risking everything. But the central figures, of course, are the family, and especially Anne.
Because of the diary.
Because of the diary. Found after the war, tragically after the family had been discovered and deported, Anne's diary became, well, it's one of the most important documents of the 20th century, isn't it?
Absolutely. Read by millions.
It gives this incredibly powerful personal account of the Holocaust. Through the eyes of a young girl just trying to live, to hope, to understand, While trapped in this horrific situation, her voice became a symbol for all the victims.
It's hard to even imagine the courage it took just to endure that day after day, the silence, the fear of discovery, and that detail about the hiding place itself.
The bookcase.
Yeah, the entrance hidden behind a movable bookcase just speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the desperation, but also the ingenuity needed just to survive.
It really does. And Anne's story, while it's so deeply personal, it's also this vital window into resilience, fear, hope under the most extreme oppression.
It's more than just one girl's story.
Much more. It shows the power of a single narrative to make history human, to make us understand the human cost of these huge, awful events. It reminds us that history isn't just dates and facts. It's about individual lives, individual experiences, and the power of those stories to shape how we remember.
So, 3 stories, 1 date, July 6th. We've seen a king grab a crown through, well, pretty ruthless means.
Yep.
We've seen a political party born out of a moral crisis, changing a nation's trajectory. And we've seen a family take a desperate step into hiding, leaving behind a testimony that echoes through history.
And linking them all, that shared date, it just highlights how unpredictable history is and how much individual choices and collective actions really matter.
Whether it's a power play in a royal court,
Or a protest meeting in Michigan.
or the quiet courage behind a bookcase in Amsterdam.
Exactly. These moments, centuries apart, they show how power shifts, how societies grapple with crises, how human resilience endures. It's this constant unfolding story, isn't it? Full of ambition, vulnerability, and constant change.
Which brings us to our final thought, something for you listening to mull over. What really jumps out at you about the fact that one single day, July 6th, can mark such incredibly different pivotal moments? And maybe what does that suggest about this ongoing, ever-changing story of humanity?
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more history daily.